As long as Judith is here in this house, I don't need you anymore. I have no intention of supporting you with Judith's money. Leave right now." I had always felt that my mother wasn't interested in me. Despite that, I kept trying my best, believing that someday she would accept me. But I was mistaken. Toxic parents never change. So I gave up hope and left the house. I never imagined that later on, she would ask me for help. I am Christy, 38 years old. I'm still unmarried and living at my parents' house. In my 20s, I wanted to get married, but now it seems impossible. One reason is my weak health. I'm not suffering from any major illness, but I often feel unwell over minor issues. I catch colds frequently and often run a high fever, making it difficult for me to work full-time. Part-time jobs are my limit, but even then, I often have to take days off due to a sudden illness, so I'm not working regularly. This naturally leads to spending more time at home. Recently, I've started working from home, which reduces the burden of commuting. However, my mother seems to think I'm just shutting myself in my room. Since we live together, it's hard to tell her not to interfere. Being unable to work full-time, I am grateful to be able to stay at my family home. Thus, I endure her sarcasm and try to be patient. However, I cover all the utility bills and I pay the property tax for our house. I also handle the repair costs for our long-lived-in home. I don't pay for all the groceries, but I bear a significant part of the costs. Since my father passed away 3 years ago, I have been paying these expenses to avoid burdening my mother. In addition to that, I handle the household chores. When I'm feeling unwell, I do rely on my mother, but normally cooking, laundry, and cleaning are always my responsibilities. Yet my mother still voices her dissatisfaction. How long do I have to take care of a daughter like this at home? I don't remember raising you to be this way. She often complains, distorting her face in disapproval. Honestly, even now, past the age of 30, I think it must be a burden to still be living at my parents'. However, I cover most of the living expenses and take care of everything at home when I am well. Yet, I sometimes wonder if it's really necessary for her to express such discontent. I would think that life should be somewhat easier for her. There wasn't much money left by my father, practically just this house. Moreover, the pension she started receiving in her 60s isn't much. Still, the fact that she can buy what she likes and enjoy her retirement freely is because I support her. Is it selfish of me to wish she would understand this more? Why is it that my beloved Judith left this house, and you, who doesn't matter, are always here? I wish Judith would come back home, my mother would say aloud, intending for me to hear. Judith is my younger sister, 3 years my junior. Unlike me, she is healthy, has a beautiful face, and is academically talented. My mother is proud of Judith and feels she can show her off to anyone. I have always been compared to her and disliked by my mother. To me, my mother was a terrible presence. The differences in clothes, meals, and even the way she interacted with us were clear. To my mother, I was like air, while Judith was treated as her only daughter. Despite such circumstances, the reason I was able to grow up without rebelling is because of my father. He would admonish my mother and showered me with the affection that she did not. If it weren't for my father, I might not have made it to this day. After he passed away, my mother felt lost and even began to depend on me. So despite my poor health, I worked hard at household chores for her sake. But now that she has fully recovered, it seems my efforts are viewed as pointless. Every day, she just asks, "When are you leaving?" Sometimes I think about moving out and living on my own, but then she says, "Make sure you send money home every month. You need to repay the favor for all the care I've given you." Hearing this makes it hard for me to decide to live on my own. Moreover, she says, "After you move out, you still need to come over to do the chores. You're not married and have plenty of time, so it wouldn't hurt you to do that." Living alone while sending money home and managing household chores seems impossible. Listening to my mother's complaints every day only worsens my health. Yet, I cannot bring myself to leave her. So ultimately, I spend each day pained by her words. One day, my sister, who was married and had left home, came to visit. Her 6-year-old daughter was with her. I thought she had just come to show her face after a long time. But then she made a shocking statement. "From today, we'll be living here." From today? What happened? Responding to my question, she surprised me further. "I got divorced and moved out." "What?" "You got divorced." "That's what I just said." "Why did you get divorced?" "Living together brings various issues. The condo is in my husband's name, so I can't live there anymore. There must be reasons for my sister's abrupt divorce and departure. I can quit my current hospital job, but there are plenty of other places to work. Every hospital needs doctors, after all. We'll pay for our own living expenses, so it should be fine. Not only is my sister, Judith, beautiful, but she's also smart and became a doctor. There's no doubt that she doesn't have to worry about money. Surely I'll find a new job soon enough, and then I won't be home much, so I'll leave the housework to you," Big Sis Judith declared. She walked in and headed straight to the living room, saying, "I'm starving." She arrived just as I finished preparing dinner. When I hurried back to the living room, they had already started eating. My mother, sister, and niece were all sitting around the table. There was no place for me. In fact, my meal wasn't even prepared. Originally, I had only prepared enough for my mother and myself. Surely they must have divided that between the three of them. "This is delicious," my sister said, unconcerned about me. "I'm so happy to see your face. Don't hold back, eat plenty." With her favorite daughter back, my mother was in a great mood, completely disregarding me. My niece quietly progressed through her meal, looking tired and sleepy. This scene felt strangely familiar, and suddenly, memories of the past came flooding back. It was the same view I always saw when my father was away on business trips. When he was not around, my mother took the opportunity to ignore me. She and my sister would sit at the table, disregarding not only my seat but my very existence. Remembering the past, I almost burst into tears. I went out to buy my own dinner. Unlike back then, having the money to buy my own food now felt like a salvation. Thinking of my beloved father, I walked slowly, tears streaming down my face. And so began my life with my sister and her daughter. It's not that I'm particularly at odds with my sister, Judith, but I feel she is favored by our mother, and she treats me with disdain. Consequently, she treats me like a maid, saying things like, "Big sis, please clean the room. I'm working, so you handle the house stuff," she says while lounging on the sofa. Even though she claims she's working, it didn't seem like she had found a formal job yet. When I asked her what she planned to do, she snapped back a bit angrily. "It's no use telling you. There are plenty of jobs for a doctor. I've been working nonstop until now, so let me relax a bit." "Okay, but what about living expenses?" "You're so annoying. I'll pay you back once I start working. You're always nagging about money," she retorted, and I was left speechless. Due to habits formed in childhood, I find it difficult to speak up to my mother and sister. I can't rely on my mother's pension, and my sister insists she'll pay once she starts working, yet she contributes nothing financially. Thus, I end up bearing the cost of living, alone. Additionally, all the household chores are my responsibility, while the two of them just laze around. I thought about sending my niece to kindergarten, but was told, "She'll start elementary school soon, there's no need. Big sis can play with her." Watching the two of them idly, I was the only one burdened with all responsibilities and could only sigh. I live through hectic days daily. Even if I feel slightly unwell, neither of them shows any sign of taking over the household duties. Since Judith started living with us, my mother has completely stopped doing any housework. She only seems to enjoy chatting with Judith. They don't seem to care about me at all. Why am I even doing this? No one listened to my words. Still, There was no sign of Judith looking for a job. When I asked when she was going to start working, my sister only got angry, making it difficult for me to ask again. Seeing her say she was going for a job interview and leave the house made me feel a bit relieved. As I returned to my room with a sense of relief and started reading the newspaper, an article caught my eye. Can this be real? It's not a dream, right? Startled by the sudden development, I jumped when I heard a knock at the door. Could it be my sister? Maybe she came to hurry me for dinner preparation, but it seemed too early for that. While I was pondering this, Christy, open the door. Hurry up, my mother yelled angrily. I had locked the door because I didn't want things to get stolen, but hesitated to open it as my mother seemed very angry. However, I couldn't just leave it locked, so when I opened the door, my mother was standing there with a furious expression. What have you been doing? You know Judith is out for a job interview, don't you? I know, so. If you know, then get out of this house right now. I was shocked when my mother suddenly demanded something outrageous. What do you mean? Don't make me say it again. Get out. Incredibly, my mother was telling me to leave the house. Why should I? You're no longer needed here. You're really slow to catch on. What? Why? Despite all my efforts for the family, even when I wasn't feeling well, I managed the household chores, and now I'm no longer needed? What are you even doing? Always holed up at home using your health as an excuse not to work. I am working from home. I contribute money and I do the chores. People who are useless are no longer needed in this house. With such a definitive statement, I found myself unable to argue back. As long as Judith is here in this house, I don't need you anymore. I have no intention of supporting you with Judith's money. Leave right now. Hearing my mother's words, I felt something inside me crumble. My efforts meant nothing. Both my mother and sister could easily cast me aside. Finally, I came to a realization. No, it was more of a confirmation. It was futile to hope they would understand my efforts or share my feelings. Hoping for anything from these people was pointless. I understand. I'll leave the house. At that moment, I pictured my father's face. It's okay to end this, right, Dad? Did I do my best? I asked him silently in my heart. It felt as if he nodded back apologetically, giving me the push I needed to make a decision. I will leave the house immediately. It's a relief. I never needed a daughter like you in the first place. My mother's harsh words no longer had the power to hurt me. Soon, I would be free and liberated. I had no regrets about this house, and no reason to cling to it. So I simply nodded and began to prepare to leave. What followed happened very quickly. I quickly found a new place to live, and luckily, it met all my requirements. I signed the contract immediately and proceeded with the moving arrangements. Finally, the day of the move arrived. Finally the nuisance is gone. Don't ever come back, my mother said, laughing. My sister also laughed and said, enjoy your poor single life. Don't you dare ask for money. After all, family is just like strangers. I had nothing more to say to them. Calmly, I said only goodbye and left the house. My new life was surprisingly comfortable. The time at my family home felt like a distant dream, and I was living comfortably without any hardships. I hardly ever fell ill anymore. Although I still occasionally ran a fever, my health was much better compared to when I was at my parents' house. Just when I thought my peaceful days would continue, I received a call from my mother. Christy, can you help me? Not knowing what had happened, I agreed to meet her. We arranged to meet at a cafe near the station. What could have happened? It had been only 2 months since I moved out. Had something happened at home? As I walked to the cafe, filled with worry, I soon found myself in front of it. Entering the cafe, I saw that my mother had already been seated. What's the urgency? Please, I need your help. She pleaded as I took my seat. Her face drew close with a worried expression. So explain properly. I demanded, a bit angrily. Perhaps surprised by my assertiveness, my mother suddenly started crying. Judith has been terrible. I can't live with her anymore. My mother's voice was almost like a scream. She continued, sniffling. She lied about going to job interviews. She wasn't going to interviews at all. What do you mean by lies? I asked for clarification. Crying, my mother explained that instead of going to job interviews, Judith had actually been going out to have fun. I heard she was meeting a man outside, she exclaimed. What? I was stunned, but my mother went on. And it turns out she wasn't really working even after she got married. How is that possible? Wasn't she working at a hospital? That's what she lied about. She was secretly seeing another man without her husband knowing. When he found out, it led to their divorce. It looks like her ex-husband will be getting custody of their daughter. They're in the middle of negotiations. Is that really true? It's shocking, right? It was unthinkable. I had never imagined that my sister wasn't actually a doctor. She's not showing any remorse about the divorce or the alimony she has to pay. In fact, she seems to be enjoying herself. Isn't that awful? That is terrible. I found it unbelievable, yet somehow believable at the same time. During our time together, I had noticed that Judith tended to avoid inconvenient situations and had a high sense of pride. It was hard to believe that she could have sustained the mentally demanding job of a doctor. Was it possible that she hadn't been working at all since her marriage? How her ex-husband hadn't noticed sooner was beyond me. So she got divorced because she was eventually found out. Did she really think she could use her husband's money so freely without getting caught? I am at a loss for words over Judith's recklessness. Can she even afford to pay the divorce settlement without any money? She's saying that since she has no money, I should pay it for her. Hearing that, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. My sister, who has no intention of working, is trying to dump everything on our mother. My pension is small, and there's hardly any cash left from your dad's estate. It's impossible to pay. My mother began to cry again. She doesn't do any housework or cleaning at home either. Why not? It seems she never did it before. Her husband didn't know, but it looks like she hired a maid secretly. And then, most of his money was gone, and everything came out. That's actually funny. I couldn't help but laugh. Who is she to talk? Mom, you did something similar by making me do all the household chores. Don't lump me together with Judith. What's the difference, I wonder? My mother continues to surprise me. So, what does that have to do with me? Please come back home. I won't return. It's obvious. You're abandoning me? Have you forgotten all the care I provided at home? My mother's face turned red suddenly, her emotions escalating when she heard my unexpected refusal. This is why you're not endearing. Even though I took care of you as a mother, you're such an ungrateful daughter. While I silently listened to my mother's words, I quietly grasped a glass on the table. You have no right to refuse. You need to come back home immediately, do the chores, and clean. And don't forget about the money. There's a lot to be done, so instead of complaining, you should hurry back and get to it. I couldn't wait until the end. With a swift motion, I splashed the water from the glass I was holding onto my mother's splash. In that instant, she fell silent. The surroundings became deathly quiet. Only the sound of dripping water echoed inside the cafe. My mother's face, shocked and trembling, was a sight to behold. Sorry about that. My hand slipped, I said. As I spoke, I reached for my mother's glass. Just a moment. As if she wanted to say wait, I splashed her again. Water hit directly into her mouth as she was about to speak, causing her to choke. Cough. Cough. What are you doing? Cough. It slipped again. My apologies. I quickly apologized to the approaching waiter and used a towel I had to wipe the wet areas. The waiter brought a mop and cleaned the floor. After apologizing again, I turned to look at my mother. Staring in disbelief, I tossed the towel I was holding at her. "Why don't you wipe yourself off? What are you doing?" "I'm soaking wet." I could catch a cold from being this wet. What does it matter if you catch a cold? What did you just say? Enough. This is how I always felt. My mother continued to scream. I raised my voice, determined not to be outdone. At that moment, the cafe fell silent again. Regretting the escalation, but needing to make my point, I lowered my voice and began to explain to my shocked mother. When I was little, I always had to bathe in cold water. I could only use small towels, and hair dryers were forbidden, so I was always shivering. The situation didn't change even when I became an adult. The days Dad was home were better, but the days he wasn't were even worse. Weren't they? And after Dad died, you know very well what happened. My mother had only allowed me to use small towels and never let me touch the hairdryer. It's no wonder I was always in poor health. That was certainly true. Since I started living on my own, I hadn't been sick once. Initially, I thought it was because the stress from my mother and sister was gone, but I began to realize it wasn't just that. The root cause was my mother. Who would return to a home with someone like you? I've taken care of you all these years, so it's only natural you should listen to your parent. Like I said earlier, you haven't taken care of me at all. What? Unlike before, I spoke back firmly, and my mother gradually stumbled over her words. I don't remember you raising me at all. It was Dad who raised me. Without him, I wouldn't be who I am today. What you did was not care, it was abuse. That's not true. After Dad died, I've paid back more than enough over these 3 years. I worked hard doing household chores even on days when I felt sick. Have you ever once cared about my health? It was because of me that you could live comfortably, right? Who's thanks to? It's thanks to Christy. So, you understand why I said I won't come back. I understand, but... Still, further conversation seemed pointless. I quietly stood up from my seat. Wait, we haven't finished talking, have we? Living alone is tough, we could live together, so... I forgot to mention. I cut off my mother's attempt to persuade me and showed her a photo on my phone. What's this photo supposed to mean? Look closely. It's a luxury apartment. So what? This is my home. What? My mother exclaimed as I revealed my surprising life in a luxury apartment. That's your place? You can't possibly have the money for that. Actually, I won the lottery. What did you say? I've always thought I had a terrible life, but God didn't abandon me, who lived honestly. The day you told me to get out of the house, that day's newspaper had the winning numbers. That was when I saw the numbers in the newspaper and thought, can this be real? Is it not a dream? With this money, I was able to buy the apartment. I still have plenty of money, but I'm saving it properly and earning my own living expenses. I don't have to worry about getting sick anymore, and I can work now. In just this short period. 2 months is enough. My mother seemed at a loss for words. So please don't contact me anymore. I have no intention of meeting you or Judith ever again. Goodbye. As I started to leave, my astonished mother hastily clung to me. Wait. I apologize for everything before. Please don't abandon me. Smiling, I responded to her plea. Judith once said that family is ultimately just strangers, so to me you are now a stranger. Leaving those words behind, I walked out of the cafe. My mother was left speechless, completely hollowed out. A few days later, my mother called again, demanding, "Let me live together with you." But I immediately refused. Judith also contacted me saying, "I'm having a hard time with Mom. You should take care of the house and contribute money." I rejected her request as well. Family is just strangers, right? I said, and hung up the phone. I then blocked both my mother's and sister's numbers. I later heard from relatives that Judith is still unemployed. She has run out of money for going out and is just staying at home. My mother, having no interest in housework, let the house quickly become a mess. My niece was taken in by her ex-husband. With funds depleted, my mother had no choice but to sell the house. It's an old family home, located in the countryside, so the land wasn't worth much. My mother and sister moved into an old apartment with the little money they had left. It seems their money vanished quickly. My mother has been begging relatives for money. Eventually, even the relatives disowned her, and she now leads a lonely and impoverished life with my sister. My sister still refuses to work, which may very well be a consequence of my mother's excessive coddling. As for me, I've been completely liberated from my mother and sister and am enjoying peaceful days. My health is good, and both my work and personal life are fulfilling. Recently, I've had a new development in my life. Would you consider dating me with marriage in mind? A serious-looking man asked me, and now we are in a relationship. We plan to marry next year. I'm going to be happy, I said, speaking to a photo of my father, and it felt as if he smiled back at me,